Welcome to the Jobs and Work podcast. If you're like most Americans, you spend a significant amount of your time working. In fact, we spend more time at our jobs than anywhere else. But how often do we really talk about work in America? On this podcast, the Work for Change team will. Work for Change, LLC is a team of social scientists, thought leaders, and digital storytellers who dig into the critical issues affecting American workers and workplaces today. Our podcast is co-hosted by Dr. Kendra Jason and myself, Dr. Kris Maycumber. We'll also bring guests onto the show who reflect the diversity of the American workforce. We are so excited for you to join us as we lead the efforts to humanize the workplace by building dignity and equity into jobs, work, and organizations. Please subscribe to the podcast and share us with your friends and family. You can learn more about Work for Change at workforchangellc.com. Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Jobs and Work podcast. This is episode number 14, and I am your co-host, Kris Maycumber.
And I'm co-host Kendra Jason.
And today we are going to be talking about a topic related to in the news. And we're going to be talking about the killing of Daunte Wright in the context of the impact that the trauma of police shootings of Black people have on workers, on the workplace. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have a conversation about, this really important topic and what we can do as a society and what we can do, how we can think about this in terms of what people are coming into the workplace with. The trauma and psychological and emotional stress and strain of living life with the impending, fear of violence. So, Kendra.
Yeah, thank you. One thing that Kris and I think about a lot, we're sociologists. We focus on the sociology of inequality, and we really focus on the interpersonal relationships between people in organizations and different relationships. And we also think about not just the intended, but also the unintended consequences of action and negotiation, if you will. And so today's topic is really tough. I mean, it's admittedly tough. Kris and I had a long conversation on if we even wanted to bring this to the table to talk about, because it's just a really tough discussion. But I think we really feel that we would be amiss if we did not discuss it, because it has such long-reaching impacts and influences on not just employees, but the relationship between workers, the relationship a worker has with their coworker, the worker has with their boss and their organization, as to how our coworkers and bosses and workplaces respond or don't respond to the trauma, the racial uprisings, the call for social justice. We saw this, of course, nearly a year ago with the killing of George Floyd and the racial uprisings that followed in the summer of 2020. From that, we saw a lot of companies really respond with either an anti-bias statement, anti-racial statement. They engaged in diversity training. They noted the action steps that they would take to help their communities deal with the traumas and the injustices on whatever level that they felt was appropriate. And here we are again, almost a year later, nearly the same city, nearly the same situation. I mean, it's so parallel. It's not identical, but it's so parallel. And it's just really tough for the community at large to deal with. But I mean, just frankly, even more so for members of the Black community.
And that's something that I think, as a white person, You know, there's so many white people right now who are, trying to learn everything they can about anti-racism and
Mhm.
don't know what to do and don't know how to talk to their Black coworkers about what's happening. And people are in this like stressful, like want to do something, want to do better. But I think one important reality for white people is that we will never like reckon with, we will never understand what it is like to
Yes.
have to get up and go to work
Mhm.
after not only the recent events but the collective, the historical carrying the weight of your identity being tied to the weight of slavery, to the weight of Jim Crow, right? And what's happening today is part and parcel of all of that. It's not different. It's the same fear. It's the same, terrorism that happens. It's that the same psychological toll that this has. And like we can read every book and we can talk about it in critical, honest ways. But we will never, in a physical, visceral level, understand what it is like to walk around in a Black body or to have to parent Black children in a white supremacist culture. So
Yeah.
something that we had talked about too is, how language is so important, and Black Lives Matter is such an important frame and such an important statement. And we also, what I'm seeing more of, which I think is good, is more direct attention to white supremacy,
Oh
more
yeah.
direct attention to the ideology, the system of the power of white supremacy that is really like the engine that is still chugging along. We can have counter movements,
Mhm.
right? We can have that, which is creating resistance, but white supremacy is alive and well. We know now that the largest threat to our own country is domestic terrorism in the form of white supremacist groups. So, and if people want to learn more, white people want to learn more, we need to learn more about white supremacy, and we need to learn more about how do young people get radicalized into white supremacy, because it is a growing movement right now. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that because I know there's a lot of white people who are wondering like how and what do I do and what do I say? I'm afraid to say something. And it's like, I think first just sitting with understanding that you will never understand. So when somebody comes to you and says something that you don't understand, or you think it can't possibly be like that, it's because you don't understand. Like you will never get it the way that Black people have to experience it, and to just sort of like sit with that before you want to jump into action is all I wanted to add.
Yeah, I think too, many white people, and I'll just give it as a comparison. A lot of people don't really, I think, can really understand how they are connected to, these ideas that we have about white supremacy and white social structures, and how that matters for their workplaces and in their own personal lives. And so, to put it really simply, if where you work is primarily managed, I mean, like your management structure, your ownership structure, primarily white people, like primarily or predominantly white people. If most of the clients that you serve, the customers that you serve are predominantly white, overwhelmingly white, if most of your coworkers are white, that means people who are hired into the organization are predominantly white, or primarily white. You are more likely, it's by nature that organization was founded, designed, and built to serve the needs of white people, right? And so, and you're employed in that system, right? And so you're a part of that system as well. Now, this also means that Black people and other people of color are also a part of this system, right? We work in predominantly white workplaces and navigate predominantly white organizations and systems. It's a part of how our society is structured, because quantitatively or by numbers, there in the United States, there are more people who are racialized as white or identify as white than other groups, right? And so the difference, however, is that if you are a white person and you work and operate in a predominantly white institution, then again, that institution was designed to serve for your success. You may not see it because I mean, I think the best analogy is that you're a fish in water. You don't see how this entire structure is designed for you not to fail. Doesn't mean that you don't have failures. It doesn't mean that you don't have challenges. It doesn't mean that you get everything that you want, of course, but it is designed in a way that is, created for your success or your ease of navigation. Black people and other people of color, however, who operate and navigate these same workplaces and these same organizations and these same systems have been socialized, trained, and taught to navigate it in spite of how it is not designed for our success. And what that means is that the resources are not there that provides our success. Cultural competence, like there's typically little to no motivation for a white organization to understand the cultural basics or important nature or holidays, things that are important culturally to a people. White organizations really don't have a lot of motivation to learn about those things and to accommodate those things. And so just by nature, we are operating in the same systems together. Kris and I met each other in a workplace, she operated successfully through it and I did as well, but her daily experiences were very, very different than my daily experiences. Doesn't mean that she had challenges, doesn't mean that it was a breeze, but because of the nature of Kris being a white woman or a white person, there were advantages that she had, or there were challenges that I had that she did not experience. And so I think Kris is saying something really powerful when she's saying that, one issue of disconnect is that, a part of white privilege, and I know a lot of people, you hear that term, you may not understand what it means, but a part of white privilege is that you don't have to acknowledge these differences. Like it's not an important part of your life to acknowledge or address the difference between the experiences of whites and others. And in that ability to not acknowledge it or to claim that it exists, it's really easy to deny that race matters. Right. And so the whole thing, Black Lives Matter, the whole thing about anti-racist statements, is all about race. And a lot of people, especially white people, push back against anything about race because they have been taught that, race shouldn't matter, right? That we should live colorblind, the character of someone, not their skin color. But what we know is that you must acknowledge race because race makes a difference in the daily experiences of people's lives. So just for a second to go back to, I don't want to lose sense of Daunte Wright and George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Tony Dade and so many others who have died at the hands of the police. And why this matters for the workplace is because of another point that Kris was mentioning about, what white people will not or cannot understand or have a hard time understanding is that there is a sense of community, it's a sense of peoplehood between Black people as a community. There's a sense of connection, and Kris said this as well. So when something happens to Daunte Wright, to George Floyd, to Breonna Taylor, there is a sense of that is someone in your immediate or extended family, peoplehood, community that has been murdered. That has had this long ripple effect in the community. And even if not that, it's the crazy sense of randomness that, as Kris said, to be a Black woman, to raise a Black child, to love a Black man, right? And you operate or you live in a society where when you get pulled over, like as a Black person, when you get pulled over, you literally think, am I going to get hurt? Will I get murdered in this interaction? I know from Sandra Bland, if you remember Sandra Bland's case from just a few years ago, she was pulled over originally because she did not use a turn signal, right? So Sandra Bland was in Texas. She did not use she switched lanes. She did not use a turn signal. She got pulled over The cop told her to put out her cigarette. She's like, it's my right. I don't have to put out my cigarette. She knew her rights. The police officer got really frustrated and basically arrested her, and she ended up dead a couple days later in police custody. And that is under suspicious circumstances, right? And so I will tell you that as a Black woman who so relates to Sandra Bland on so many reasons, that every single time that I switch lanes in a car, since Sandra Bland years ago, it flashes in my mind, I need to change my signal, or I may get pulled over by the police and I may end up dead. Mm-hmm. Like, that is a quick thing that happens. And if you think about every single time you're driving a car and you turn on your switch, your turn signal or don't, to have just that quick memory, those are the type of psychological wages that your Black coworkers are coming into work with every day. And then on top of that, you have another murder, right? Under similar circumstances or by the hands of the same government system. Mm-hmm. And so, this is what Kris was talking about when, she's saying to, if you don't understand, or if you don't get it, or, if you're a Black person and you're just like, finally someone's saying it, or, articulating what I feel, these are the things that are going through, the minds of your Black coworkers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Kendra, thanks for sharing that. I mean, I know when Sandra Bland, I think of her often, but I don't in a physical way experience that. Right. I don't have to, right? I don't have to live in a world where when I get pulled over by the cops, I think, oh, you know what? And then I think finances. I can't afford a ticket right now. Mm-hmm. I don't have, my heart rate might accelerate, but I'm not in fear for my life. I'm not, if I'm with my kids, I don't worry about, I don't have to process all of that. I don't go through all of that. It's trauma. It's these mini psychological traumas. And I think what happened, you said too, like the way that society is still structured. So for people who don't understand white supremacy, we like to think, it's tempting to think that we all have agency, we have free will, right? We have like the pull yourself up by your bootstraps sort of ideology, and that motivates people, and that can motivate us to go for our dreams. But the reality is we live in a society, which means we have social systems, we have institutions that are very much not penetrable by free will and agency, that have, routine patterns of organization that have been structured in very specific ways. And they have been structured by white people historically to meet the needs of white people. And, there's such a powerful example of this is the whole legacy system. Legacies, which if you go to a college and your child will have preferential access to that college. The whole entire reason that legacies were created, and I know that you know this, Kendra, but for our listeners, this is an example of white supremacy that is very much alive today. That historically, the reason that the legacy system was created was that Jewish families were starting to outscore white families in terms of college admittance exams. So the white families, white people at the time were saying, we are no longer going to be the dominant group to have access to these universities. This was before Jewish families had assimilated and were considered white. Mm-hmm. So they wanted to secure their access to colleges. So they started to create, well, let's come up with a system that will give us preferential access, and will secure our access to college. Mm-hmm. And so historically today, who's more likely to have a legacy at Harvard? Who's more likely to have a legacy? So this is one of those examples of the enduring power of institutional systemic racism. That, of course, because families of color and children of color were systematically denied access to these white institutions, today they have less of a chance of having a legacy who went there. And that's one example of how our systems are organized to reflect white supremacy. So we think we have free will and power to do, but we really don't. We really don't when we are interacting with government systems, with the police, with the education system, with the healthcare system. We don't have as much agency and free will to shape our life as we think. Our choices are always constrained and enabled by the context of our lives. And we live in a highly structured society. Yeah, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, so what I wanted to do or, help us think about is how can we manage the everyday workplace experience in the midst of these great social ills, this daily trauma. I can tell you, I'm thinking about it from both ends. I think for Black workers or any type of, recently Asian workers have, Asian people have dealt with or have been dealing with a lot of discrimination and violence targeted towards their community. But, the mass shooting in Georgia last month was one of the first recent mass instances or something that the media really, grabbed attention to. And a part of managing that is if you cannot go to work that day, then see if you can call out, see if you can take time for yourself, for your family to process the anger, the grief, the confusion, the paralysis of the moment. Now, I know it's not viable for everybody to call out because everybody doesn't have, that privilege or that benefit, but try to take time in whatever way that you can. And another part of that taking time is that, it doesn't mean that we have to fake it through the day. And I think this is really where those interactions with white colleagues come in. So, Daunte Wright was murdered just a few days ago, heavily on me and my colleagues. Kris and I talked about it a lot, this week as well. And what really has helped me get through and still be productive and maintain through my day is at the top of every conversation, the person who I'm talking to, white people, they'll say like, how are you doing today? They'll leave it open. They don't say like, let's talk about that Daunte Wright, or let's talk about, what's going on. They don't open it up and force me into a conversation. They just check on my well-being, and then they leave it up to me to say, I'm doing okay, or it's kind of tough day, or, if I want to talk in detail about what's going on in Minneapolis or anywhere else, there's an open window for that. But it frames the conversation, and it's not that we just power through our daily interactions as if nothing's happening or nothing has happened. So that's been really important as far as a coping for me. Another thing that I've done personally is, and again, everybody, I just, I've disengaged a bit. I mean, my productivity has gone down this week. And I think this is another consequence that, of this trauma, is that, especially Black people and other people who are being victimized within their community, their work productivity may go down. They may be distracted for a few days, just trying to make sense of what's happening. And so it's really hard to write a paper or to do a report or, to handle a budget or whatever really concentrated thing that you have to when you have all of these, dealing with, again, all these psychological waves, this community trauma at the same time. And so I say all that to say, it would be really great if managers and employers could be sensitive to that fact and not have penalties and, scrutiny if productivity goes down. Now, the interesting thing is that productivity often does not go down. We basically, burrow through it, and then when we get home, we kind of try to lay our burdens down in that sense. But, a part of that coping, that coping and that stress is to just try to get your work done, because you don't want to be targeted as a Black worker or a worker of color in any sense for not being productive in spite of what's going on. Because again, to Kris's point, many white people are not carrying the weight of the murder of Daunte Wright on their shoulders this week. I mean, it's just something that happened in the news or some crazy thing that's happening again. And they're just like, oh, you know, but the weight of it is different and it doesn't affect them in the same way.
And even for those of us who are committed to social justice, who feel things, who feel despair, and who feel saddened, right? We don't experience it in that physical, this is my reality too. This is the reality of people I love and of people I care about, but not of my life and my, so for whites who are working with Black coworkers, just like you said, checking in, like, how are you doing? And not, asking what they need, do you feel like you want to be here today? Do you, what do you need? How can I support you? I think it's such a helpful but simple question. Like, how can I support you this week? Is there anything I can do? If it's not, if it's just like to stop talking, then I'll stop talking right now. Right. It's like, what do you need? How can I show up for you? And knowing your role. And I think part of what we've talked about this before in a previous podcast, because whites are so used to being understanding everything and having space, feeling entitled and claiming space and claiming knowledge. They can't claim knowledge about racism. And it's like the one thing that they're like, they don't get in a way that other people have access to this knowledge. So they might think they get it intellectually. So just knowing, like, I don't know what you need right now, but how can I support you can be helpful.
This is a tough subject. However, it is tough in the daily experiences of millions of Americans, Black, white, brown, in between. And it matters for how we engage in our daily experiences. It matters for the expectations that we have of each other, of our bosses, of our coworkers. It speaks to how our coworkers, supervisors, and workplaces are or are not, supporting us and responding to our needs. And when I say us, I mean us as a community, not just one specific group, because it does take understanding across different mediums, across cultures, to really get at the heart of how to best support each other, right? And it doesn't mean that white people are at a loss where, they can't respond better or appropriately. It's just many of them just don't know how. They don't understand their responsibility or their power to do so, and how just little things can make such a big difference. Because I know a lot of people, a lot of coworkers, mixed race coworkers, are really well intentioned. They have great relationships across races, and they want to support each other, but it just gets really sticky and complicated when it comes to racial issues for a lot of reasons. And so we just wanted to just open up this conversation today. We didn't nearly get as far as we would, love to go, in a different context, on a different platform. But we just think it's really important for workplaces, managers, supervisors, to really think about how you can better support your workers, especially your workers of color, and how you can create a workplace culture among all your workers, so that you're supporting each other and more understanding of these situations that happen in our everyday lives, in the news. If it's in the news in one area, that means it's happening to a family in that area. It's happening to a community in that area, and we're not exempt. So before we leave, we just want to remind you again, Kris and I, we have a company called Work for Change. And one of the things that we really have a lot of fun and pride in is our Starting Your Own Business workshop, which we will have this weekend. Is Saturday, April 17th and 24th. You can look to our website to get more information on that. We hope we see you there. Outside of that, if you could just continue to like, subscribe, and share. We're on different platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. So please like, subscribe, and share so that we can work to make the world of work better.